Once upon a time, in a faraway land called Missouri, there lived a woman named Bertha. She was the proprietress of a hotel in a small town and seems to have been living a happy life, but in 1906 her husband suddenly died. She didn't stay single for long, though. The next year, she was married and began a new career of farm wife and local nurse, even though she was untrained. For the nurse bit, she knew about farming. But even with her lack of medical education, the community still knew she would show up to care for their sick and ailing. But then they noticed that her patients had this strange habit of abruptly dying. Was it just coincidence? Or was she slipping them a little more than sugar in their cup of tea? Welcome to, or welcome back to, the Agatha May Detective Agency. I'm Agatha May, and I'm so glad you've joined me for another episode of Laced. Our story begins back in 1871 when a bouncing bundle of Bertha was born. Bertha Alice Williams was born on October 30th, 1871, to William Poindexter and Matilda Lee Williams in the small community of Morse Mill, Missouri, which is in Jefferson County. In its heyday in the 1920s, Morse Mill was a retreat for the St. Louis elite to get away from the city heat and noise and spend some time in one of the cottages that dotted the banks of the Big River. By 1940, the grist mill that gave the town its name was shut down and the town dwindled from there. Bertha's first marriage was to Henry Graham on Christmas Day in 1894. Henry was a farmer, and the two were also the proprietors of the commercial hotel in Hillsboro, Missouri. According to the local papers at the time, after about 20 years of marriage, Bertha got a wandering eye, and it wandered right over to a man named Eugene Gifford. He went by Gene and was 12 years younger than Bertha. Gene frequented the hotel and was engaged to a local woman, but it wasn't long before he'd broken off his engagement. Rumors were that Bertha and Jean had a little something going on the side. Then Bertha's husband Henry suddenly died on November 4th, 1906, at the young age of 34. His tombstone has his date of death as November 30th, but unless the newspapers at the time ran his obituary before he actually died, his death was on the 4th. So Bertha and old Gino were just free as two birds, and by September of 1907 they were married. To each other, even. They ran the commercial hotel until 1908, when they moved to Catawissa, Missouri. Jean farmed there while Bertha took care of her two children, a daughter from her first marriage and a son with Jean. It wasn't long before Bertha was known in the community as the local nurse. At the first murmur of someone not feeling well, there Bertha would be in her starched white apron, eager to assist. But then the deaths began. The first death was that of Jean's cousin, Sherman Pounds, 49. On February 20th, 1917, Sherman was on the road outside Bertha's one night, and according to Bertha and Jean, Sherman was highly intoxicated, so they brought him inside. Within a few hours, he was dead. The cause of death listed on the death certificate was acute alcoholism. There was no autopsy performed. Later, his daughter Marguerite said that her father rarely drank. The second death was Marguerite's 3-year-old daughter, Beulah, on December 27th, 1922. After Sherman's death, his daughter had no reason to doubt what the Giffords had told her about her father's death. So when she was visiting the Giffords one night, she had no qualms when Bertha insisted that she and Beulah stay there the night. The next morning, Marguerite fixed Beulah's breakfast and then went home while Beulah stayed with Bertha. When she returned 2.5 hours later, she found Bertha crying, and she told her that Beulah was sick. It was the first time that Beulah had ever been ill, but Marguerite didn't call the doctor until she started vomiting. By then, it was too late. Beulah had died before the doctor made it. After Beulah's death, one of Marguerite's sisters, Ida, was insisting on a post-mortem. Bertha wasn't having it, though. They ended up having quite a heated argument about it, with Bertha winning. She said she wouldn't have any such thing happening in her house. Marguerite's future husband, Fletcher Rosen, was a witness to the argument. After Beulah's death, Marguerite never spoke to the Giffords again. In August of 1925, Ethel Shamel, who had lived in Jefferson County her whole life, died of stomach cancer. She had left a husband, George, and two boys, Elmer, age 6, and Lloyd, age 7. After the death of his wife, the Giffords offered to have him and his son stay with them and told George he could work on the farm as a way to pay room and board. They'd recently moved to a 180-acre farm and could use the help. George agreed, and the three moved in on Saturday, October 10th. By the next Tuesday, Lloyd was dead. He was just 1 week shy of his 8th birthday. 6 weeks later, little Elmer followed. Can you imagine what it was like for their poor father? He had just lost his wife 2 months before, and now both of his sons, who were seemingly healthy, suddenly died. The doctor wanted an autopsy performed on both boys, but George wouldn't agree to it. I think the poor man probably had just had enough of life at the time. That fall, Eugene was arrested for bootlegging. This was about smack dab in the middle of the Prohibition era, so the production and sale of alcohol was illegal. Revenue agents had found a still and several thousand gallons of mash. So Gino wasn't just making moonshine for a few friends, he had quite the business going. In April of 1927, he was found guilty and given a fine that would be over $8,000 in today's money. The final death that happened at the Giffords' house was that of Ed Brindley on May 16, 1927. Ed went to visit Jean the night of the 15th, and like Sherman, Ed had been drinking. Jean invited him inside, but Ed wanted to lay out back on some flooring around the cistern. But Jean insisted he stay inside the house, so Ed spent the night in one of the spare bedrooms. The next morning, while Ed was still sleeping, Jean left for St. Louis on business. When Ed woke, he felt better and asked Bertha if she had anything he could eat, so she made him 2 sandwiches. He immediately became ill. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the doctor was called. Ed told him about eating the sandwiches, and the doctor said if he got worse to call again. He was called back to the house a few hours later. Ed was unconscious, and by 10 o'clock that night, he was dead. The community of Catawissa had started discussing the deaths that happened under Bertha's watch after Beulah died, and with each death there were more and more whispers. After the third death, the prosecuting attorney was receiving anonymous letters about the deaths. By the time Ed died, the neighbors weren't whispering anymore and were outright accusing Bertha and Jean of having been the cause of all the deaths. By June 1927, the deaths were officially being investigated, and the newspapers gave all the sordid details. Bertha refused to talk to any of the reporters. Jean, on the other hand, was filled with indignant wrath and denied all of the accusations. It seems like maybe the Giffords didn't feel welcome in Catawissa after that, and by August of that year they had moved to Eureka, Missouri, in neighboring Franklin County. But moving didn't stop the investigation from continuing, and in a year the investigation had directed police to an arrest. On August 25, 1928, Bertha Gifford was arrested for the murder of Ed Brindley and Elmer Shamel. When asked for a statement after she was arrested, Bertha replied, "I ain't tellin' no tales." She then went on to write the following confession, quote, I, Bertha Gifford, wife of E.B. Gifford, now living near Eureka, Missouri, hereby state of my own free will, without threat or promise of immunity, that my husband and I lived on the Nicholson place near Catawissa about August 8, 1925, when George Shamel brought his son, Lloyd, 8 or 9 years old, and his son, Albert John, about 7, to our house when he and they made their home with us. Lloyd was sick at the time. Dr. Hemker waited on him and left some medicine for him. I put some arsenic in the medicine before I gave it to him, and Lloyd died on or about August 11, 1925. About September 18, 1925, Elmer John Shamel took sick. Dr. Hemker was called and left some medicine for him, and I put some arsenic in it, and Elmer John died about September 22nd. About May 15, 1927, Edward Brindley, about 48 years old, drove up to our house in an old Ford. He was drunk. He came in, sat down for a little while, then got up and went out and fell down on the concrete walk. My husband went out and brought him in and fixed the bed for him in the front room, and my husband laid him on the bed. His mother came over and insisted we call a doctor, so I called Dr. Hemker. He left some medicine for him, and I put some arsenic in the medicine. He died May 16, 1927. In all three cases, the patients were suffering from severe pains in the stomach, and I put arsenic in their medicine to quiet their pains. End quote. So she was arrested for two, but confessed to three, and Jean refused to believe Bertha's confession, at least publicly. He said that she was a nervous woman and had had high blood pressure for years. Well, I'm not sure why high blood pressure would cause a false confession, but okay, Eugene. Bertha's stories didn't exactly match up to the original accounts that were published in 1927, though. When the doctor had talked about the deaths the year before, he didn't say anything about prescribing any of the medicine. He said that Bertha told him she gave one of the boys a pill, but he didn't specify that he had prescribed it. He also mentioned that all five of the deaths at the House of Mystery, which is what the neighbors started to call it, all had the same symptoms, vomiting, and then all five lapsed into unconsciousness. I think it's just a little bit too much of a coincidence. I think all five were poisoned. But did Martha actually mean to poison them? Did she really think arsenic was going to help ease their stomach pains? Or was she just playing the role of a little doofus? I mean, you'd think after the first couple of deaths, she'd be like, well, damn, I don't think this arsenic's helping. Bertha also said that she hadn't given them any more than she took herself. She told authorities that she took it for beauty reasons. And in the Victorian era, women did take arsenic as a beauty treatment because it gave them pale skin. But arsenic wafers had stopped being sold with the passing of the 1906 Pure Food and Drug Act. So if Bertha was supposedly taking arsenic as a beauty treatment to make her skin pale, why was her complexion described as ruddy? After the three bodies were exhumed and tested, the medical examiner said that even a fraction of what the deceased had in their systems would have killed her if she'd been taking it. So if Bertha didn't mean to murder people, why did she lie about taking arsenic? During Bertha's trial, Ed Brinley's mother testified that after his death, some of the neighbors were talking about his body being exhumed and tested for poison. She said that Bertha told her to not allow Ed's body to be exhumed. And then authorities learned that Sherman Pound's death might not have been the first one under Bertha's watch. After she was arrested, people began coming forward to talk about how their loved ones died suddenly after Bertha began caring for them. There were never any exhumations in these other deaths to test for arsenic, but there is that whole smoke and fire thing. These are the other deaths that happened while in Bertha's care. Emily Gifford, Bertha's mother-in-law, died January 24, 1912 in the Gifford home. James Gifford, the 13-year-old brother of Jean, died in the Gifford home on May 8, 1913. Bernard Stolfelder, who was 15 months old, died February 26, 1915. His sister, Margaret, was 2 when she died on February 28, 1921. Lena Brown, 31, became violently ill after Bertha cared for her and died in horrible pain in September of 1922. Another Stolfelder child, Irene, died on May 10, 1923, at the age of 7. Mary Elizabeth Brinley, a cousin of Ed Brinley, was only 7 when she died on May 18, 1925. She had a surgery on a brain tumor, and Bertha was taking care of her while she convalesced. The night before Mary died, her aunt said that she had seen Bertha bending over the child's bed and had a medicine box in her hand. When the aunt entered the room, she said Bertha hurriedly put the box in the pocket of her apron. Mary's father, Caswell Brinley, died a few months after her. He had been hit by a car and was in pretty bad shape. Bertha took care of him, and Eugene took him to the hospital the next day. He died the day after being admitted. Leona Slocum, the aunt of Elmer and Lloyd Shamel, died October 12, 1925. Bertie Ennerstall died February 9, 1926. Her son Gus said that he and Jean had had an argument about some property, and that when he had gone to Jean and Bertha's to talk to Jean about it, Bertha chased him off with a butcher knife, and he had had her arrested for failure to keep the peace. James Ogle, the Giffords' hired hand, died November 20, 1927. The neighbors said that he had threatened to sue the Giffords for $300 that they owed him. And then if we throw in Bertha's first husband's untimely death, That's 18 that were connected to Bertha. If I'd been taking care of 18 people and they all died, I'd start to question my skills as a caregiver. So, did Bertha poison her first husband so she could be with Eugene? And was Eugene aware of it? On November 21st, 1928, Bertha was found not guilty by reason of insanity and was sentenced to spend the rest of her life at the Missouri State Hospital in Farmington. A few years after Bertha had been at the hospital, Jean attempted to have her be given a psychological exam in the hopes that she would be found cured. Because if she was found to be sane, then she would have been set free. But that didn't work out for him. She was never tested. I think either Jean knew that Bertha had poisoned those she was accused of and he was complicit in it, or he was simple to the point that he believed she was innocent. Pharmacists testified that Bertha had purchased a large amount of arsenic over the years and told the pharmacist that it was for rats. So it seems as though she knew she shouldn't be giving people arsenic. I have a theory about some of the deaths. What if the death of Sherman Pounds was because of bad hooch? I don't mean that's what killed him, but what if he'd gotten a batch of bad moonshine from Jean and he was threatening to make it known? That would have ruined Jean's little side gig. In the 1927 articles about the deaths, both Jean and Bertha tried blaming his death on drinking, and they also blamed Ed Brindley's death on drinking. Bertha even took a bottle to the doctor that Ed had drank from, but the doctor wasn't interested. However, she didn't take that bottle to the doctor until people were talking about the possibility that she'd killed those she was supposed to be caring for. Jean also tried to blame Ed's death on bad moonshine. Were there other deaths that happened because someone knew about Jean's side gig? It's definitely a case that is a lot more convoluted than I initially thought when I first started looking into it. In fact, I almost decided to nix the idea of having an episode about Bertha, but the more I dug, the more questions I had. I think most of the questions are still unanswered, and I don't know that they ever will be. When we look at the reason Bertha gave for administering arsenic in the 3 deaths she admitted to, it was for altruistic reasons. She thought it would help them. But did she think the arsenic would cure them or just put them out of their misery? There's a chance that Bertha looked at those she gave arsenic to as a mercy killing. There's also a chance that Bertha was just completely doolally and poisoned people because she enjoyed it. Then there's the chance that Bertha and Jean were killing people who found out about their moonshine business. Whatever the reason, I think she knew she was killing people, which is why she lied about the arsenic and didn't want autopsies performed. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. I have gone round and round with this case until my brain feels like I've had a shot or two of some barn hooch. Bertha died of natural causes on August 20th, 1951, at the age of 79. Thank you so much for being here. Please share and comment so YouTube will push this video out for more people to learn about Bertha's story. I'll be back soon with more true crime. Until then, stay safe and be happy.